Join me on an inspiring journey through the world of fitness, health, and performance with the Genetic Coach, where I delve deep into the genetic foundations of athletic endurance, discovering how genetics is revolutionizing our understanding of human potential and how we can unlock our full athletic capabilities through a fresh perspective on conventional practices. Hello, everyone, and I'm so pleased you're with us today, as we're going to be touching on a topic that may well be close to the heart for many of you. We're talking about being active or training for a specific goal while struggling with autoimmunity, and what that means for the athlete and how best to support the body. My special guest today is Margaret Floyd Barry. Now, Margaret is a functional nutritionist, author, speaker, educator, and real food advocate. Through years of experience working with the most complex client cases, including reversing her own autoimmune condition, Margaret uses a powerful system for restoring health by addressing the root cause of illness. Today, Margaret teaches fellow practitioners the same proven system that she uses to get her clients life-changing results through restorative wellness solutions, which is a 2-year comprehensive functional nutrition certification program for qualified health professionals. Margaret also runs Restorative Corporate Wellness, a team of restorative wellness practitioners facilitating health transformations with corporate clients. She is the author of Eat Naked and its follow-up cookbook, The Naked Foods Cookbook, and she's also the host of the Clinicians Corner podcast, where she interviews some of the world's top experts in the fields of functional health and nutrition. Now, wow, that was a mouthful, but testament to the wonderful work you are doing to change people's lives. So we welcome you, Margaret.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you. It's rare that I get to talk about two of my pet topics, which is training and addressing autoimmunity all at the same time. So it's an honor.
Wonderful. I mean, my pet passion is the coaching and training side of things. So I'm so interested to find out more about autoimmunity and how one deals with that when training for a big goal. So let's dive straight in. Let's just start off with the reason why you had this interest in chronic disease specifically, and using food in ways that support the body to make fundamental differences to the well-being of your patients.
Absolutely. For so many of us, I come to this with a lot of personal history. And, some of that is my own, some of it is through watching my mom. The biggest piece of this for me was watching my mom. So my mom was diagnosed with 3 very severe autoimmune diseases. She had lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and pulmonary fibrosis. Each in and of itself can be quite devastating. So the 3 together was quite something. And she struggled so much over the course of about 20 years from diagnosis to when she ultimately lost her life to side effects from the very medications that were keeping her alive. And so this was one of these situations where she's on one hand a medical miracle, and on the other hand, I just got a front row seat to how that model can be actually the failings of that model. So while she was alive and while she responded to medications that could keep her going, the quality of life and it was just felt like this brutal 2 steps forward, 5 steps back, 1 step forward, 3 steps back. It was this slow, painful process of degeneration that I wouldn't wish on anybody. So even though it did extend her life, the quality of the life was not great. And then, as I said, it was ultimately side effects from the very medications keeping her alive that killed her. So that was a very powerful, in-your-face example of what I just don't want to see happen to anybody else. And I kind of pair this with an experience I had back in my early 20s. I'd had eczema, which is interesting because now we know that there's autoimmune origins to that. At the time, we didn't think anything of that had anything to do with autoimmunity, but horrible eczema. And anyone who knows this, it's just this brutal itch that is like head to toe. The itch that rashes was the way it was described to me. And it was awful. I had it everywhere. And I'd had it from my teens until my 20s. And I was just, using the cortisone creams and et cetera. And there was a moment I remember the doctor recommended, I started getting it on my eyelids. And he said, oh, just put the cortisone cream on your eyelids. And there's something about that, even though I knew nothing about health at that time in my life, I thought that just doesn't feel right. I feel like it's going to, I had this image of it kind of burning off my eyelids, which
My
is inaccurate, but it just didn't feel right. And somebody, it was a tipping point for me. And a friend of mine was like, have you ever thought of dealing with this naturally? And I was like, what does that even mean? But she recommended me to a practitioner who looked at my diet and did all sorts of testing and made some pretty dramatic changes. And within 3 weeks, that eczema that I'd been dealing with for 10 years was gone and has never come back.
wow.
And that was mid 20s. And I just celebrated my 50th birthday. So that was a very, another personally powerful moment. So between these two things, watching my mom and then my own experience, the fact that food could have such a, I remember going to that practitioner thinking, like, what does my diet have anything to do with my skin? It just seemed so unrelated. And I really, I ended up switching careers in my early 30s and I've never looked back.
Wow, what a testimony. I think there's been a massive shift in recent years from the traditional medical approach to treating disease to this more functional approach, and looking more holistically at a person and seeing and not just treating the symptoms, but really understanding the root cause. I mean, why do you think the traditional way of treating disease is failing so many? I mean, essentially, it is
Mhm.
just treating the symptoms rather than
Mhm.
the root cause.
Well, if you think about it, I like to think about it like a formula. So if you have, A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus, however many other variables equals, X, the disease state, the symptoms. I feel like the Western medical model that we've been working with for so long is looking at the X. It's looking at that end of the equation. What is it? We look to name it, and then we manipulate symptoms to help you feel better. And of course, we're interested in helping the individual feel better. That's absolutely what we're all in the business of. But it doesn't take enough time looking at the A plus B plus C plus D, like all of the pieces. And sometimes it's A plus E plus X or plus G plus, you know what I mean? It's a weird combination and it's a lot more work to try to unpack and unpick the different variables that allow the body to get to this place where a disease manifests. But that's a vitally important piece of the puzzle that I think that gets skipped over. And I think the functional approach that is now starting to gain so much traction and is so effective is because, yes, we're looking at X. What is the end result? But we don't stop there. We're looking at what allowed this to develop. And we're doing that in a very profound way. We're turning, I always say to clients, like, I will leave no stone unturned. Like, we're going to get to the root of this. So it's not just about managing how you feel, it's about giving your body what it needs so that it can heal itself. You heal from the inside out. And it's really, really amazing what we see happen when you take that approach. It's the harder path. So I want to be clear about that. There's a reason why it is not. I mean, it's becoming so much more mainstream, but it asks a lot of the individual. It's a lot easier to just take a pill to make your symptoms go away.
Well, that's
Um,
what I was just going to say. I mean, everybody's
yeah,
looking for the quick fix,
this is not a quick
whereas
fix.
this is not a quick fix.
No.
You've got to, it takes time to understand, all those factors that you've mentioned. Do you think there's a sense of people accepting the fact that, okay, this is a process, it's a journey that I need to go on now, and I'm willing to do that, as opposed to just saying, well, I just need to pop a pill and feel better?
Totally. I think that in my experience, people do need to reach that tipping point where they're willing to do the work.
Mm,
I've had clients I've turned away because I said, you're too early in the process. I would love to help you. And, the times where I've made exceptions to that, I don't feel good about it because they get excited at the beginning, but they weren't, I hate to say this, they weren't sick enough. They hadn't tried enough things to understand that this work is actually worth it. The
mm,
people who are the most successful in this are the people who have tried the other options and for whom the pill doesn't fix the ill, right? Like the pill is not actually helping them with their symptoms, or the side effects of those drugs are starting to impact them, or the diminished quality of life, and they're ready to actually do the work.
yeah.
Those are the people who are the most successful in this. Now, I think that there's also another piece that we're starting to see, which is just a tidal shift overall in terms of the acceptance of functional health, functional medicine, the validity of these approaches. The more that these become popularized, it's hard to do this stuff not just because we're talking about making dietary changes, etc., But because those dietary changes are in our current world, the harder path. It's often the more expensive, the least convenient. You're the one who is sitting at the restaurant asking the awkward questions about what's in the meal. You don't want to be that person. It can feel socially ostracizing. But as there's a cultural shift to more accepting some of this and the environment changes, then it becomes a much easier thing to do when it's like what everyone's doing. So I know people roll their eyes when certain health trends become fads, and I can appreciate that. Something like the gluten-free, and yes, has it become a fad? 100%. Do I think people should eat gluten? No. And am I excited to see that it's becoming so much more accessible and accepted and easy to make that food choice? 100%. And are there problems with a lot of the gluten-free products out there? Absolutely. Like we're not there, quote unquote, wherever there is, but there's progress. And so the more that we have an environment and a culture that accepts and embraces the healthier choice as the better choice, as opposed to I've had parents say, I can't make these changes with my kids because I'm going to be attacked as, depriving my children, and that's crazy to me, but that is starting to change. So I think this all is going to become a lot easier the more popularized it becomes.
Which is exciting. So let's get into our topic for the day,
Yeah.
autoimmune disease. Can you explain to us what that is?
100%. So at the most basic level, your immune system has two jobs: to do internal housekeeping and to protect you from pathogens. And as part of this work, the immune system has this amazing capability to differentiate between self and other. And then when it's other, between friend and foe, right? So if you're thinking about housekeeping, you don't want to housekeep yourself. I mean, you want to keep things clean, but you don't want to it's like if you're doing, if you're taking out the trash in your house, you're not like throwing out the trash bin as well. You know what I mean? Like you're differentiating between what actually has to be gotten rid of and then, the actual environment that you're wanting to keep clean. And so this distinction between that and then between friend and foe, recognizing the difference between the broccoli you ate for lunch and a pathogen that needs to be attacked and killed. Those are two external things and they're different levels of threat. What happens with the immune system with autoimmunity is that mechanism, this is a very oversimplification, but at its root, what happens is that this mechanism to differentiate between self and other and then between friend and foe gets confused, right? And suddenly the immune system is starting to attack self ultimately. And it's mistaking self for enemy other. And that is problematic. That's very problematic. And that's, so the nature of autoimmunity is that your immune system is attacking self. The definition of the specific disease is going to depend on what is the target of the immune system. Is it your thyroid and you've got Hashimoto's? Is it, cartilage and tissue, is it and rheumatoid arthritis? Is it a body system and something like lupus where it's more systemic as opposed to just a specific tissue? Is it, elements of the skin and you get psoriasis? I mean, so that's how you find the individual. And I think, gosh, what's the number? Is it over 130, 140? I feel like every day they're adding new autoimmune diseases or understanding that there are autoimmune components to health issues that we didn't recognize this mechanism was an aspect of. So our job, just to kind of extend this, you just asked what an autoimmune condition is, what happens, what I like to describe it, again, a total oversimplification. But if you think about how, I don't know how you are, I know how I am. When I'm overworked and I don't have a minute to myself and I'm burning the candle at both ends, I start making bad decisions, right? Like I am just like, I'm not firing at optimal capacity. And to a large degree, that's the same way that your immune system functions. If it's constantly handling things, if it's got this onslaught of toxins and really low quality foods, and you're breathing polluted air and you're drinking contaminated water and you're super stressed and either over exercising or under exercising, all of these things are going to impact your immune system. Maybe you're eating foods that are triggering the inflammatory process in your body and you don't even realize it. Like there's so many things that can be exhausting the immune system. You have a low-lying infection that you're not aware of, or you've got a compromised gut lining. There's endless things that can be exhausting that immune system. And when that's happening day in, day out, it's no wonder the immune system starts to make basically bad decisions.
Yeah.
So there's lots of different mechanisms. It's very complicated from an immunology perspective, but at its root, that's really what's happening. And so, the medical model is to then sort of dampen the immune response. Let's reduce inflammation. Let's suppress the immune system so that it's not overacting, and there's definitely a time and a place for that. But it's not asking that question about the A plus B plus C plus D plus E that got us to the X, right? It's not asking what's fatiguing, what's draining that immune system so much that is getting the body to the point where the immune system, which is so wise and so powerful, that it's making these bad decisions. So our approach is we got to identify the A plus B plus C plus D plus E to figure out and identify those things and remove them so the immune system can catch its breath, basically, and help kind of re-educate it. And there's a lot of different strategies for that, but that's like the essential difference between the functional approach and the traditional medical approach with dealing with autoimmunity. And I really want to be clear, I am not saying that there's not times where we need to really calm down the immune system. Like that's an absolutely appropriate response, but we don't want to stop there. We don't want to say, okay, now we're done. We want to do that deeper digging.
Okay, so you've clearly got, as you said, tools and strategies to dig deeper into these cases and to really unearth the fundamental issues. So maybe you can illustrate this with talking about you in your case scenario. You had an autoimmune condition, but you've also been training, and your goal was to run a marathon, or multiple marathons. But yeah, let's chat about that.
Yeah. Well, so the autoimmunity that I was diagnosed with back when I was pregnant with my second daughter was Hashimoto's. So, of course, it's the immune system attacking the thyroid. And symptoms of that are very, very low energy, slowed down metabolism, sort of the classic. There's a lot of different ways it manifests, but for a lot of people, it's like you just kind of can't get yourself off the couch. It's a level of fatigue. It's not just the like, oh, multiple snooze fatigues. It's like I physically can't get out of bed fatigue. It's like to your bones. And so that and running marathons feels like two
Not a
very
good
like how can you even do that? In fact, I was saying because I celebrated my 50th birthday and I ran 50 miles to celebrate my 50th birthday. And I can't remember who I was talking to recently. I said something about 50 miles and that, and then the Hashimoto's. And this person was like, wait, what? How did you do that with Hashimoto's?
Yeah.
And I'm here to say it's completely possible. Now you need to be very smart about it, very, very smart about it. And so I think, what would happen to me before I really addressed some of these root causes, I was not able to train long. If I did any kind of hard workouts, I'd push myself into migraines really quickly. Like I would almost plan my training schedule where it's like I had a hard workout and I'd really make sure the next day was really light because there was such a high probability of me being flattened, which is not good. Like you're going to be tired after a hard workout, but you don't want to be flattened. Those are two different things, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it would just take me out of training altogether. So it wasn't even an option to train for, and this is before I was getting back into marathoning. I really needed to address the underlying pieces of the puzzle for me before getting back into training and really pacing my training very slowly and patiently, which is 100% not my forte. um, to make sure that I didn't overdo it. So I used, the strategies that I did everything that I do with my clients. I did with myself. I will never forget that day when I realized that Hashimoto's was a piece of my health puzzle. It was a shock. It was really, my mom had already passed, so I knew what this could turn into. And I know, one autoimmune disease begets another. So it's very, if you're not addressing the core mechanisms that I talked about, what is fatiguing that and engaging that immune system, the likelihood once you've been diagnosed with one autoimmune disease of you being diagnosed with the second and third, like it really, if you're just band-aiding the symptoms and not addressing the root cause, your immune system's still tired. No matter what you're doing to kind of manipulate it, you need to identify those pieces and remove it. Otherwise, this turns into other things. So I was acutely aware this is something I take very seriously. Now,
Mm.
for me, the process I used was, we always start with both the gut and to identify and remove food sensitivities. That's an absolute starting point for everybody. Over 80% of the immune system lives in and around the digestive tract. So
Mm.
if you're not addressing gut health, then you're very likely missing a piece of the puzzle. It might not be the thing that takes you across the finish line, but it certainly is a piece of the process. So that's absolutely the starting point where we're doing deep dive into, using stool testing to understand, how is that microbiome doing? Are there any low-lying pathogens that you might have? How is your digestive function? Is there inflammation in the digestive tract? Do you need to support that gut lining? So a lot of pieces that we're wanting to consider. And while we do that, there's a very specific test that I use to identify the foods that are in this moment in time triggering additional inflammation. Such an
Mm.
important question when we're thinking about training in particular. We know that as athletes, especially endurance athletes, we are adding a significant inflammatory burden to our body. That's part of the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah. Not only through the exercise, but through all the carbs and nutritional products that you're putting into the body.
Exactly. There's a lot of different ways that we can be adding an additional inflammatory burden.
Mm.
So if there already is an inflammatory burden, and if what you are eating, something that, I speak a lot on hidden food sensitivities. And there's a lot of different ways the body can react adversely to our food. But one of the mechanisms is that you can eat a food and it will trigger this inflammatory response. This is a food sensitivity. There's different ways this happens, sometimes with antibodies, sometimes without antibodies. But the net result is I could be eating what feels like a perfectly innocuous meal. I'm not talking about the usual suspects like the gluten and the dairy and the soy and the processed foods. Like, yes, all those are sort of often by nature pro-inflammatory. I'm
Yeah.
not talking about those. I'm talking about in your body at this moment in time, avocado might be triggering inflammation. Turmeric. Do you know how many times I have seen turmeric show up on food sensitivity testing with clients who are intentionally seeking out their turmeric lattes, and they're consuming it every chance they get because of its anti-inflammatory
Anti-inflammatory.
properties.
Yeah.
And in this moment in their body, not forever. I keep saying in this moment because it's really important to recognize that these things shift.
Mm.
But in this moment in their body, it's actually triggering an inflammatory response. So we want to be able to identify those foods so we can pull them out while we do that gut healing so that we're alleviating those right there, identifying dietary sources of inflammation and removing them and healing whatever is going on in the gut. That massively removes a burden, a huge burden on the immune system, our overall systemic inflammation. And
Mm.
this is important for everybody, but for somebody who has goals of endurance training and racing in this area, it's a non-negotiable.
Mm. Okay, so the gut is a starting point. Did you find in your case specific triggers that you had to remove from the diet immediately? What were those? Give us some examples.
Yeah, for me, I can give you an example of, and this is one of the reasons why I'm such a believer in testing as opposed to trying to do, complicated elimination diets,
Yeah.
particularly for these hidden sensitivities, because a lot of the thing with food sensitivities is that there can be different degrees of reaction. And so you might, and the reaction can happen in a delayed fashion. So here we are chatting on a Wednesday I could go and have something for lunch that I don't react to until Friday or even Saturday. And
Okay.
that's just mind-boggling, right? Like how if I have a symptom on Saturday, I'm not thinking back to what I ate today. Right? It's almost logistically impossible to identify all the foods that could be driving an inflammatory response through an elimination diet. So I love testing. When I did testing, I could have told you before testing there's something up with my breakfast. I could just feel it, like something was off. And I'm also a total creature of habit. So I ate the same breakfast almost all the time, which was two eggs, a half an avocado, some cultured or some sauerkraut, so some like cultured cabbage, basically, and sometimes some bacon. And then I would have a cup of coffee with heavy cream. Now, if you were to tell me you are sensitive to something in your breakfast, and I didn't have testing, the places I would have like pulled out the cream and I would have stopped eating the eggs.
Yeah.
I did my food sensitivity test came back. I was sensitive to coffee. That was a moment. Pork, avocado, and cabbage. Literally the pieces that were, in my mind, the most innocuous. And I
Yeah.
mean, coffee, I know some people love it, some people hate it. But just from a food sensitivity perspective, that wasn't what I was expecting,
No.
right? So, others that were on the list, and this was a long time ago now, so I'm not going to remember everything, but I do remember cashews were on the list, which I was like, cashews, they're so innocent, these little cashews. And I'm not going to remember any of the others in this moment in time, but it was foods that we don't think of as inflammatory. I'm not going to be pulling out avocado and sauerkraut. I was eating sauerkraut as much as I could for all the benefits of this beautiful fermented food, right? And here it was, cabbage was actually part of the problem. Now I can eat all of these things now, totally fine. I reintroduce all of them once I've done that gut healing. But that was so I did that process where I do the gut testing and I did the food sensitivity testing and I pulled these pieces out. And, if we think about gut health and training, our gut health influences our ability to train in so many different ways. So number one is it influences our ability to absorb the nutrients that we need to fuel ourselves and to build muscle, to recover, right? That's actually one of the things I always remind people is, we have that saying that feels very trite, is like, oh, you are what you eat.
Yeah.
You literally are. You literally are. Like, we are walking food. Like, that's not just a saying, And if you look at I'll get clients to like, look at your hand. It's like every cell, the nails, the skin, the muscles, the joints, every bit of it, that was once food. And your body's ability to kind of harvest the nutrients it needs to become you all rests in a properly functioning digestive process. So if there's anything going on there that's inhibiting that, one of the things that we see a lot is low stomach acid. That's such a simple thing. It's ubiquitous. And you have low stomach acid, that's going to inhibit your body's ability to digest protein, to access the important B vitamins, to access the minerals from your diet. It's going to predispose you to infection from foodborne pathogens. It's going to impact how effectively all of the digestive processes after the stomach. That's such a simple piece that so many people deal with. And what are some of the things that inhibit our body's ability to produce stomach acid? Well, stress, alcohol, eating a lot of carbs, a vegetarian diet, because it's the consumption of protein, particularly animal proteins, that stimulate the body's production of hydrochloric acid. Of course, there's other things like you can have an overgrowth of H. pylori, which will inhibit stomach acid production. But, so many of these things, even just getting older, our stomach acidity levels drop as we get older. And you think about endurance training on top of this. I mean, it's a thing, right? And so we have to be thinking about the fact that just to fuel, we think about, I feel like as an endurance athletes in particular, this is a little different from people who focus more on sort of building muscle. Even though we're trying to build muscle, we're just thinking more about going further, faster. And so we are always thinking about fueling. But it's actually, we really need to be thinking about building, because we are breaking down that muscle tissue and we need to recover. So you need to be able to not just eat. I remember I had a client come to me years ago who was doing his diet was impeccable. His training plan, he was working with a personal trainer. So it wasn't that he was like doing things incorrectly at the gym. And he was like the definition of skinny fat. Like, this man could not put on muscle. And in conversations, we discovered that he had been taking PPI, so proton pump inhibitors, blocking the stomach's production of stomach acid for years. And I was like, you're not accessing half the protein that you're eating. So we, worked in concert with his doctor to wean him off of these, support the gut healing, support stomach acid levels. He did nothing else. He didn't change his diet. He didn't change his training. His body composition transformed, because now he's actually able to access the amino acids that he was eating in the protein in his diet. He wasn't able to get them because he wasn't breaking it down. So digestion is a super, super important piece of this puzzle.
So you talk about this gut healing process. How long was that process for you? And you were obviously kind of training while you were in this process of gut healing. Yeah, how long did it take?
Well, it's going to depend. So for most people, 3 to 4 months. And that sounds like a long time, but that, that gives us time to really, it's not just the healing, it's we want to heal and then sustain beyond that. So it's like you've kind of established a new baseline. So a good 3 to 4 months is typically sufficient for most people. Now, if there's some really severe things going on, it could take longer than that. There's a lot of other factors, if there's some deep toxicity issues, or there's other underlying factors that are driving that dysregulated gut, then absolutely we're going to need to take more time. At face value for most people, we're talking 3 to 4 months is enough to really get some good distance. I would always work with clients in a 6 month package, but that's including the 6 month process is, getting the test results. There's some time there and like it's getting on a protocol. But once you're on the protocol, it's about 3 months. And then there's typically a month before. I'm a big believer in retesting because, of course, we want you feeling better, but we also want to test just to make sure that we've achieved what we've set out to achieve. And so there's, in that last month, we're peeling away elements of the protocol so that we're kind of establishing the baseline. Because I don't want to test you to see how the supplements are working. I want to test you to see how you're doing, like how your body is handling. Because this is not about just pumping you full of supplements. This is about making sure that your body, giving your body what it needs to heal. And ideally achieving that healing so that you can then go about your training. And what I'll say about the training, it's going to depend on the individual how aggressively they can train through this process. I've had people train for marathons as they're doing this work. I've also had people really need to pare it back and go very, very slowly and just be kind of in moderate maintenance mode and just focus on that recovery side of the equation while they're doing the healing work to allow their body to heal. And I think it's really important to remember that you're building that foundation. You're building up that, we're always thinking about our training base. And you need to think about this as more than just the miles on your legs. You need to be thinking about this in terms of your overall physiological resilience. And your gut is, and other, your gut, your overall strength in your body is going to be a really, really important piece of that puzzle. So I think if there's any kind of health issues going on, starting there and I'm saying this and I recognize because I'm such the personality, I hate going slowly. I hate being slowed down. I'm actually recovering from a knee injury right now. And I probably spent the first weeks just complaining, just like, why me? I'm not graceful with this. So if anyone out there is feeling annoyed by what I'm saying, I am so with you. I hate going slowly. And I want to get back at it so badly. I can't even tell you. So it is, but it pays dividends to go to really build that foundation so that when you do, then you lean into that marathon build that you're really ready. I worked with a coach who used to always say, you've got to get in shape to get in shape to get in shape.
That
Right?
makes sense. Yeah.
Right. And
That sounds
so this is a piece of that.
So let's get into a little bit of the genetics.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
one tool in your toolbox that you
Yeah.
use to assess your clients. How do you use it?
I'd love, since added this aspect into my practice, it feels like it's been just given this whole new insight into how to support my clients better and myself better because we're so used to, I'm a big believer in data and I'm always tracking all the things. I'm tracking, I don't have my Aura ring on right now, but I'm tracking my Aura ring. I've got my, it's that runner's thing. If you've gone for a run and you didn't hit start on your watch, did it even happen?
Yeah.
Could you send a runner into more panic than not tracking their runs? I'm doing the blood work and I'm checking in on all the data. Adding in the genetic component is so helpful because it lets me know where do we need to pay extra attention. It really allows this additional layer of customization, not just on like what we're seeing happen in your body right now, but it tells me that prioritization. So, if we think about, the 3x4 panel, I love the activity pathways for understanding about the training predisposition. Is this somebody who needs more recovery or can we like really, is it okay that they're pushing through because their body recovers really quickly? Often I find that the activity pathways is very, what it is, it's very confirming, right? Most people know this. I've never gone through the results with a client where they have said, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Most of them are, even if they need a lot of recovery and they're not giving themselves recovery. They know they need a lot of recovery. They're just not doing it. But when they see that they have a genetic predisposition that really they need it, it will change their
Yeah.
relationship with that.
Yeah.
And so I find that really helpful, but even more helpful outside of the activity pathways, which are very specific to training, I'm looking at some of these bigger picture pathways, particularly those cellular pathways. So I'm thinking about your predisposition to oxidative stress. This is hugely important. And I think what's interesting is these pieces are important for all athletes. But when you have autoimmune disease that you have to keep in mind, and even when it's, deemed in remission, it's still at the back of your mind because that thing can pop back up at any moment. So it's not like we've checked it off the list and we don't have to think about it anymore. It's still there. So we're thinking about what is your predisposition to oxidative stress because we're creating more of it through our training. And there's benefits to it, but also we just have to mitigate that. We need to be really mindful of it and add in extra supports and pay a little extra attention to any kind of biomarkers that we're looking at that are going to be, in your blood work. If we're seeing certain markers elevated or lower, and we're like, oh, that could be a low point to oxidative stress, we pay extra attention to that, right? Same thing with inflammation pathways. What is your genetic predisposition to inflammation? Because again, as we talked about, we know that training is adding a whole additional inflammatory burden. And so, at your detoxification pathway, that seems like it's not related to our endurance training directly. And it's certainly not something where like, oh, I train, so my detox pathways are extra, active. It's not like that. But if you have a very compromised detox pathways genetically, we live in toxic soup. Like that's just the reality. I don't want to, but we do, right? Like, what is it? We could consume a credit card's worth of plastic every week. I can't wrap my head around that. And
Yeah.
even though, yes, we eliminate most of that, what an incredible burden this is placing on our bodies. So it's just, we don't live in the same environment that our parents did, certainly not our grandparents. It's just not even recognizable physiologically. So we
Yeah.
have to recognize that. And if you are somebody who is blessed with really beautifully strong detox pathways, awesome. But if you're not, we need to pay extra attention to that because that is putting a burden on your immune system.
Mm.
So we have to be thinking about that. Also, we have to be thinking about, there's certain detoxification pathways that depend on our body's ability to utilize B vitamins. Let's think about that methylation pathway.
Yeah.
We need to have good access to those B12, the methylfolate, and so we if we know about an individual where they are genetically compromised in these areas, then if we're seeing, if I know that somebody genetically is compromised in their methylation pathway, I'm paying a heck of a lot closer attention to their homocysteine on their blood work to know if I need to be adding in more methylated Bs or not.
Mm.
I'm not, I'm going to be probably raising the alarm bell a little earlier than I would if somebody genetically was not compromised, right? So we're thinking about these pictures, the bigger picture to support the individual's overall physiology so that we are, as much as possible, removing as many of those stressors on the immune system as possible so that we're not, because we know that we're adding an additional stressor by the training. And of course, the more competitive you are, the more intense your training is, the longer the distance. We really, really need to be paying attention to these. And as I always say, this is stuff everybody should do. And
Yeah.
and in some ways, having an autoimmune condition is a blessing because it makes it a non-negotiable.
Awesome.
If you do
Yeah.
negotiate and play with fire, then you get, you often get, yeah, your ass handed to you, just straight up. Like you get like put back in bed and told like, nope, your body is like hard no on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it all sounds pretty overwhelming for somebody who's not familiar with genetics, who's not familiar with all the testing. It is a lot to take in. And maybe you can just simplify it a little bit in terms of your own story and maybe
Mhm.
just the areas that all this testing pointed you towards.
Yeah.
And what changes did you implement to help you achieve your goal of a marathon at the end of the day?
100%. So when I looked at my activity pathways, I am one of those people. I'm like not the athlete. It's so funny. Like you see some people where you're like, oh wow, really genetically, you really are. You have everything in your favor. I'm sure
Yeah.
you see the results. And
Yeah.
it's funny because I have clients who are such not, one of my clients, she sort of accidentally qualified for Boston the very first time she ever ran a marathon, which she'd barely trained for. It's like, how does
Wow.
that happen? Right. And
Yeah.
then you look at her genetics, you're like, well, that's how it happens. You're just
Okay. Yeah.
right. So when I look at my genetics, I have like the opposite of those genes. And I'm going to forget the name of some of these pathways. I know my recovery pathway is the absolute highest. Like I need the longest amount of time. And my adaptation pathways, I adapt, and I get benefits from my training the slowest. So that's a really important information is I just need to be patient, and pushing it is not going to help me.
Mm.
So I cannot do more than 2 hard workouts in a week. And I have to give myself a ton of downtime in between that. It also meant that, sleep, non-negotiable. And that is like, if I haven't slept, I know as a lot of us runners, we get up in the crack of dawn. And it was like, if I hadn't had at least 7 hours of sleep, ideally more, but if I hadn't had minimum 7 hours, that was my benchmark. I would just push snooze. I would cancel the workout, do it later. It's not worth it. A well-rested workout was the only workout I could do. And I paid for that. I had to learn that lesson so many times. So I also, again, don't want to pretend that I was perfect and I just got this information and I changed everything and it was all happy and sunshine and rainbows. It wasn't. I went into this kicking and screaming, thinking that I could override things. And then, my body just said, nope.
Yeah.
So that was a really important thing. I also learned that, my pathways when it comes to, I have like very, very high impact genes in oxidative stress, detoxification, and inflammation, which makes sense. I look at my mom's health, like I'm sure, I got them from somewhere, but neither of my parents were the picture of health. And I'm really grateful that I have the tools that I do to be able to mitigate that. So it is when I'm in a training cycle, I mean, anyways, I'm always supporting my body, no matter what the blood work says. I am always supporting myself to anti-inflame, to bring down my levels of oxidative stress, and to support detox pathways. And I like to be streamlined in this. So, just can I name some supplements? Is that okay?
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
So I think having either NAC or glutathione in your everyday is it's mandatory.
Yeah.
And that's going to support oxidative stress. It's going to help with those detox pathways. Sulforaphane, huge benefit of that. The products Brock Elite by Mara Labs, I absolutely love. I live on that stuff. That for those detox pathways, I will share. My detox pathways are they're abysmal. And it's interesting because I've gotten to the point in my life where I can barely have a glass of wine without major repercussions. And so I barely drink. If I do drink, if I take a bunch of sulforaphane at the same time, I can actually handle it. So I'm not advocating that everyone go out and drink, but I am saying that it really works. I can see when you really support those detox pathways, something that used to flatten me, I can be completely functional. And both of those are also going to support the body to anti-inflame, but I'm also a big, just bringing in some fish oil just as a basic. There's so many benefits to that fish oil, from brain health to the, supporting the body to anti-inflame. These pieces are important. So to me, those are essentials. I mean, I of course also think we got to make sure you're optimizing your vitamin D levels based on what you see in labs. But those key pieces are they're non-negotiables. I'm always adding those in. And then when I'm in a training cycle, I'm definitely increasing my doses of all of those. And I'm checking my blood work. I'm doing comprehensive labs at the beginning of a training cycle. Depending on how long the training cycle is, I will sometimes do it within the training cycle. And then I will do it about a month after a race. I won't do it like the week after because we know it's going to look like chaos. So I
Yeah.
don't need to rest myself, like give my body a bit of a moment to get back. But then I will do it a month after to see like where are some areas that I need to lean in for deeper support. So I think that those pieces can be are really beneficial. And then, and I'm in my life, I do all the things, I do the sauna time and the red light. And, depending on the time of year, I'll do, ice baths, or, I'll do the things that are recovery strategies that might feel like nice to haves in my world. When I'm in a training cycle, they're non-negotiable. And I build it in as part of my training plan. As important as the workout is the time, either, in the sauna, with the red light or what have you.
Yeah. So it seems, obviously, you're saying that when you are in a training cycle, you've got to be so much more focused on all of these factors and really be pedantic about putting them into practice. But when it comes to things like supplements, it is expensive. It becomes expensive to be doing this on an ongoing basis.
Mhm.
So do you get to a point where like, okay, I've run my marathon now. I'm taking maybe a little bit of downtime on my training. I'm not pushing myself as hard. Do you drop some of those supplements?
Yes, I will drop down doses for sure. I have taken supplement vacations. Partly I've been doing this for so long. There's times where I'm just like, I've just utter capsule fatigue. I'm just like, I cannot take another thing.
Mm.
But I will tell you, I start to feel cruddy pretty quickly.
Okay.
So yeah, I drop the dosing and I kind of get to that, minimum effective dose of,
Yeah.
knowing that my training is significantly reduced. And then I'm not putting nearly as much of an effort on my body. But I have learned over time that if I don't do at least the maintenance, it feels like it might feel expensive and annoying in the moment, but it saves so much in the long term because then if you let that build up,
Yeah.
especially if you're dealing with autoimmune disease and you get yourself into a full-on flare, that can, especially if you have to go the medical route, that is not an inexpensive
Yeah.
process.
Yeah.
So I'd prefer to stay ahead of it and keep myself feeling good. And I do have those experiences of going off of all the things because I think, you every once in a while you think, am I just draining money? Like, what am I doing? And I have those moments where I'm like, I look at myself in the mirror and I think, what are you doing? Does any of this have any impact? And I just kind of stop it all. And then I feel awful within a few days. I'm like, oh yeah, I was working.
Okay.
And then I go
Go
back
back.
and then I feel
Yeah.
better and
Yeah.
kind of reminded myself that, yeah. And I think it's an important thing. I have clients will beat themselves up if they go off protocol for a while and they feel terrible. I'm like, I think it's great
Mm.
because now you just reminded yourself and you just learned that this stuff's actually doing something. It's not just, this isn't just a flushing money down the toilet, but this is actually helping your body.
Mm.
So yeah. And I know, and as I said, this is why the functional approach, it's harder.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
easier to pop a couple Advil after your
Yeah.
workout,
Yeah.
100%.
So I know we're running out of time, but just the last question for you. Do you think this kind of testing could be preemptive for somebody? So somebody who is an athlete
Mhm.
and is pushing themselves pretty hard over an extended period of time. Doing this type of testing that you're speaking about, the genetic testing plus the gut testing and the various other tests that you perhaps employ, would that potentially save a person from developing like an autoimmune condition or problems down the road? Or do you wait until you have the problem and then look into it?
Well, most people do wait till they have the problem and then look into it, but could you prevent things? So the question, I mean, yes, could you prevent things? Absolutely. Now, there's no way to ever prove it, right? And that's, I think, one of the challenges and one of the reasons why people wait, because those people who have come to me to work preventatively, which they do, they start to go like, why am I doing this again? Because they don't have that baseline of feeling so terrible that they've now moved away from. Even people, I always tell clients at the beginning of the process, I say, there is going to come a time when you're like feeling great and you don't remember any of this. And you're going to scratch your head and go, why am I not eating those foods? And why am I taking all these supplements? And I was like, that's the time where we need to dig in the most because your memory, it's kind of a beautiful thing, a little bit like childbirth, right? It's like, 10 minutes later, you're like, I'm never doing that again. And then a
Yeah.
couple of days later, you're like, the most beautiful experience of my life.
Yeah.
So, like marathons, all your marathon runners, this feeling. You get finished, cross the finish line, you sort of question life and all of your choices, and then find yourself that night signing up for the next race.
Yeah.
So we have a very powerful ability to forget. And so the challenge with somebody who's doing this preventatively, is it a good idea to do it preventatively? 100%. Can you prevent something from developing? I mean, yes, but will we ever be able to prove it? No. So
Yeah.
there's this
Yeah.
like, it takes a special kind of person. Often the people who do this are the people who've seen family members go through it or someone, a loved one, because they've seen up close and personal. I mean, that's why for me, when I got that Hashimoto's diagnosis, I didn't feel great, but I didn't feel awful. But I'd
Mm.
seen what was possible with autoimmune.
Mm.
And there were certain things that I changed literally that day that I have never gone back on because I was like, oh, heck no. That is not me. I'm not going that path. I know where this goes,
Yeah.
and I am not going there.
Yeah.
So people could say, well, you're different from your mom. You're a different person. You could different this. It wouldn't have gone that way. Maybe so. And I'm 100% willing to take the risk,
Mm.
and I also, genetically knowing my genetic predisposition, knowing my husband's, knowing, that I look at my children and we do a lot of things preventatively and proactively with our kids to make sure that they don't go this path. So, we always joke that we should put money into their therapy fund because their parents didn't let them eat gluten, or they, required them to, eat their vegetables and
Yeah.
take their probiotics. It's going to be where they've been traumatized. And I'm 100% okay with that. So so we definitely do things differently. And I think it's fantastic. It's just the ability to recognize that you're investing in something that's kind of invisible, and that's hard for people to do.
Yeah. But definitely powerful information. So I never asked you, did you reach your goal? Your marathon goal, and how well did you
Yeah.
do?
Well, so I've had several different goals. What I will tell you is at the peak of this, when I was dealing with all of this, coming off of the autoimmune diagnosis, really reestablishing my health and training quite seriously, I was going for a BQ and I was very far away from it. I was like over an hour I needed to take off of my time. But through this training and doing all the things that we're talking about here, being so mindful of things, I ended up taking 57 minutes off of my marathon
Oh,
time, which
wow.
is amazing. Now, I haven't BQ'd yet, although I haven't given up on that. But to me, 57 minutes off the marathon and being able to do that, I will say even more, what I'm even prouder of is, as I shared, I ran 50 miles for my 50th birthday, and I felt fantastic. I mean, I had so much fun. I came in 30 minutes faster than I was anticipating. And I felt, unlike marathons where I feel like I'm sort of crippled for a week afterwards, I was able to jog 2 days later. Like I felt fine. It was almost anticlimactic. I was like, did that even happen? I feel so good. This doesn't feel, but I used every single thing we're talking about here in order to be able to do that and take great care of myself. So it is so possible. I believe that you can achieve any, I'm such a believer in going after your dreams. I think that dreams are here to inspire us. I don't think that you have a dream that you can't achieve, or at least that in the achieving of it or in the going for it is not going to take you to who you want to be. I think I'm such a believer in that. I think big, audacious goals are just awesome. And I think that knowing your physiology and recognizing that it really can work with you and for you. And sometimes it feels like it's working against us, especially with autoimmunity. It literally is the immune system attacking self. I
Yeah.
really think that there's so many tools to unpack that and to turn that around and have your immune system on your team in chasing that goal. It just requires being mindful. And I have to tell you, I'm just so grateful for the tools. I've been telling everybody about the GeneFit tool ever since I understood what it is. And I think it's brilliant because one of the things that we have to do right now, we're, runners, we're such data junkies, but, and I love all the biometrics and all of this kind of stuff, but we always have to translate that. It's like this additional layer of information. And right now, what it's been is it's up until now, I have had to be the person to translate that for my clients. It's like, oh, okay, well, when you see this kind of, these recovery scores or whatnot, you need to pay extra attention. Or you might have a little wiggle room and yeah, you can probably still do a workout. Like I've had to be the translator and taking that data and interpreting what that means in terms of a training plan, but being able to integrate your genetics so that it's got that filter and that intelligence when looking at what your body's actually doing and then helping to inform a training. This is it. This is it.
Yeah.
You guys have cracked the code. Like, I am sorry. And I know, some people think some of the testing is expensive. I actually think it's a freaking screaming deal. It's a screaming deal. And it's a test you only have to do once. Every other test we do, or almost every other test, I'm going to get you to do it multiple times. This one, it's a once and done. And once you know your genetics, they're not going to change. But you can, of course, do so much to influence how those genes express. It's not your destiny. It's just information. And yeah, I'm so grateful to you guys for what you're doing. I think it's awesome.
Well, what a note to end on. Margaret, I could carry on talking to you for many more hours, but we do need to cut it at some point. But yeah, so inspiring and so informative, and just wonderful to hear your own personal story and the success that you've achieved. So just thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today. I've really, really enjoyed it, and I'm absolutely sure our listeners have taken a huge amount out of our chat today. So thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome anytime. Thank you so much for having me.